29, I let my mother teach my wife marriage rules. She never looked at me the same. Don't let her cry the first winter. Whatever you do, Joseph, don't let her cry the first winter. That's what my mother said the morning I brought Rebecca home. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was standing at the kitchen table with her back to the window, rolling out dough for the noon meal, and her hands were white up to the wrists with flour. There was a brown bottle sitting at the edge of the table, the one with the chipped label, the one she kept valerian root tincture in, mixed with skullcap and a little bit of honey from the Stoltzfus hives 2 farms over. I didn't know what the bottle had to do with anything. Not yet. I was 23. Rebecca was 21. We'd been married 11 days. And my mother had already started teaching my wife things I wouldn't understand for years. I remember the kitchen smelled like rendered lard, and the last of the September basil she'd hung to dry above the stove. No, wait, it wasn't September. It was early October because the corn was already cut and the stalks were stacked in shocks across the east field. I remember because the light came in low and orange through that window, the one with the crack Dat never fixed, and it hit the side of my mother's face in a way that made her look like she was carved from something. Rebecca stood in the doorway behind me. She didn't say a word. Her hands were folded over her apron, and she was watching my mother's hands move. I could feel something shifting between them, something I wasn't part of. I was 23 years old, and I'd already lost something I didn't know I had. Quick pause. My name is Joseph, and this is Rebecca's husband. If these stories stay with you, if they remind you of something the old ones knew, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, did your mother or grandmother ever pass down a remedy, a rule, or a quiet lesson that changed your marriage before you understood it? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these old ways are worth remembering. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. The thing you have to understand about where I come from, about the old order, about the way we lived in Lancaster County, is that healing wasn't something you went and got. It was something that lived in the house with you. It was in the garden. It was in the cellar. It was in the brown bottles lined up on the second shelf in the pantry, the shelf my mother kept above the reach of small hands. Nobody sat you down and said, "This is chamomile. This is valerian. This is what skullcap does when someone can't stop their mind from running at night." You just watched. You watched your mother steep things. You watched your grandmother press a poultice against your uncle's neck when his jaw swelled up so bad he couldn't open his mouth for 2 days. You watched the Brauscher come to the house, and in our district, his name was Old Amos Zook, and he had hands like leather stretched over oak. And you watched him lay those hands on a sick child and whisper something in Dietsch that nobody repeated afterward. That was the ordnung of healing. Not written, not spoken aloud, just done. And the thing that would surprise most English people, the thing that still surprises me if I'm honest, is that the remedies weren't just for the body. My mother kept a tea for grief. She kept a tincture for fear. She had a way of mixing lemon balm with dried chamomile blossoms and a half-spoon of raw honey that she said would quiet a woman's heart after a hard birth or a hard word from her husband. Medicine in our house was never just medicine. That's what the old ones knew. And the rule about marriage, the unwritten one, the one no bishop ever preached from the bench but every mother understood, was this: the first year belongs to the mother-in-law, not in a way the English would recognize. There was no cruelty in it, no control. At least, that's what I believed then. The rule was that a new bride didn't yet know how to keep a house where a man could rest. She didn't know the rhythms, when to be quiet, when to have the coffee ready, when to put the tincture in the evening water without being asked. My mother had learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers, going back to the old country, back to the Palatinate, back to a time I can't even picture. I almost asked about it once. I was maybe 16, and I watched my Aunt Leah, Dat's youngest sister, come to stay with my mother for 3 weeks after her wedding. I saw her crying at the kitchen table one evening, and my mother was standing behind her, with both hands on her shoulders, not saying a thing, just standing there. I opened my mouth to ask Dad about it, and he gave me a look, not angry, just closed, like a door that had never been open, so I didn't ask. A son doesn't. That's what the old ones knew. The autumn Rebecca came to live with me, we moved into the Dawdy house attached to my parents' farm, the small house with the green door that my gross-daddy had built in 1961, the year he turned 40. The plaster walls were cool to the touch even in July, and the kitchen had one window that faced east and caught the sunrise so bright it hurt your eyes if you forgot to pull the shade. My mother Mary was 51 then. Dat. His name was Abram, though I never once in my life called him anything but Dat. He was 54 and already starting to move slower on the bad knee side, the left one, the one he'd hurt falling from the haymow when I was 9. My mother told Rebecca the first week, "I'll come every morning at 6. We'll work together until you know the way." She said it like she was offering a gift. And Rebecca, I need you to hear this. Rebecca smiled. She thanked her. She meant it. I was told 3 things before my wedding by Dat. He said them the night before, standing in the barn, the one with the Dutch hex sign over the door that Gross-Daddy had painted, and Dat always said was just decoration, nothing superstitious. Dat said, "Be patient, be steady, and let your mother teach her." 3 things. I counted them on my fingers walking back to the house that night. I thought I understood. I didn't understand anything. Those first weeks, it looked like everything was working the way it was supposed to. My mother came every morning, 6 o'clock, never a minute passed, her shoes on the porch boards making that sound I'd known since I was born, a kind of quick double tap, because she always took the last step fast. She brought things with her. A jar of dried peppermint from her garden, a cloth bag of chamomile blossoms that smelled so strong you could catch it from the hallway. Once she brought a small tin of salve, comfrey and beeswax and something else, something she wouldn't name, that she rubbed into Rebecca's hands after a morning of canning. She taught Rebecca how to bank the wood stove so the coals held through the night. She taught her the right way to hang the wash, darks on the inside lines, whites on the outside where the wind hit. And I know that sounds small, but in our world, a woman's wash line told the neighbors everything. Rebecca learned fast. She was bright, Rebecca, quick hands, eyes that missed nothing. But I started noticing it was late October, maybe 3 weeks in, that she'd gone quiet in the evenings. Not angry quiet, not sad quiet exactly, just less, like someone had dimmed the wick on the lamp behind her eyes. She'd sit at the table after supper, and her hands would be in her lap, and she'd be looking at the wall. Not at anything on the wall, just at the wall. I didn't ask. I didn't know I was supposed to. The night it broke open was a Thursday in November. I know it was Thursday because the men's prayer meeting was Wednesday, and I'd come home late the night before, and Rebecca had already been asleep, or pretending to be, I don't know. That Thursday evening I came in from the barn and the house smelled wrong. Not bad, just not like food. It smelled like my mother's house, like valerian and chamomile and that sharp green bite of dried lemon balm. I came through the kitchen door and my mother was standing at the stove. Rebecca was sitting at the table with a cup in front of her, both hands wrapped around it, and her face, give me a second. Her face was the face of someone who had been listening for a very long time. My mother turned to me and said, "Plain as morning. Joseph, go back to the barn. We're not finished." And I stood there. My boots were still on. I had mud on my left knee from where I'd knelt to check the heifer's hoof. And my wife looked up at me, looked right at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, something flatter, something that had already decided. I went back to the barn. I stood by the workbench and picked up a hand plane and set it down again. I could hear the wind pushing against the north wall. The kerosene lamp by the door was hissing that high, thin sound it made when the wick needed trimming. I stood there for 40 minutes. When I came back inside, my mother was gone. Her coat was off the hook. Rebecca was washing the cup at the sink. Just the one cup, slow, turning it under the water like it was something precious or something contaminated. I couldn't tell which. I said, "What was she teaching you?" Rebecca didn't turn around. She said, "How to be your wife." I said, "You are my wife." And she set the cup on the drain board, set it down so careful, and said, "Not the way she thinks I should be." I didn't know what to do with that. I stood in my own kitchen in my own house, and I didn't know what to do. I could smell the remnants of whatever tea my mother had made, still hanging in the air, and underneath it something sharper, the valerian, that dark root smell, like turned earth and sleep, and something medical that wasn't medical at all. Rebecca dried her hands on the towel, the blue one with the frayed corner, and walked past me to the bedroom without another word. I heard the door close. Not a slam, worse, a click, soft and deliberate. I was 23 years old, and I understood for the first time that quiet was louder than anything. The next morning my mother came at 6. Same double tap on the porch. Same jar of something in her hand. This time it was elderberry syrup, dark as ink, the batch she made every October and parceled out through winter like it was currency. She walked in, and Rebecca was already at the stove, and my mother started talking like nothing had happened. She told Rebecca that when a husband comes home with tension in his shoulders, you don't ask what's wrong. You put valerian in the evening tea, 7 drops, no more, and you set it by his plate without a word. She said when he can't sleep, you don't lie there waiting. You get up, you warm milk with a half spoon of honey and a pinch of nutmeg, and you bring it to him. She said a wife reads the body the way a farmer reads the sky. You learn the signs and you act before the storm. And I heard all of this because I was standing in the hallway. I hadn't left yet. I was in my stocking feet on the pine floorboards, the ones that creak by the second bedroom door, and I heard every word. My mother was teaching my wife to disappear into my comfort, to make herself into medicine for me. And the thing I couldn't name for years, was that my mother believed she was giving Rebecca a gift. She believed that with everything she had. She had done the same thing for Dat for 30 years. Her mother had done it before her. The old remedy for a hard marriage wasn't to fix the marriage, it was to fix the wife. And the tea, the valerian, the chamomile, the skullcap my mother mixed with such careful hands, it wasn't just for me. She was giving it to Rebecca, too, every morning, to keep her calm, to keep her steady, to keep her quiet. And neither of us, not me, not Rebecca, understood yet what that meant. I need to say something here, and I need to say it plain. My mother wasn't a cruel woman. I need you to understand that before I go any further. She was a woman who had buried 2 children before their first birthdays and never once spoke about it in front of anyone but God. She had hands that could strip the skin from an apple in one unbroken ribbon and press a plantain poultice against a wound so gentle you'd think the herb itself was doing the holding. She sang while she worked, always the same hymn, the one from the Osbund, the slow one, and her voice was small and clear, and it filled whatever room she was in. She loved me, she loved Rebecca, and she believed, the way you believe the sun will come up, the way you believe the creek will freeze in January, that a woman's job was to smooth every rough edge in her husband's life until he never felt a splinter. She didn't know that was a kind of harm. Her mother hadn't known. Her mother's mother hadn't known. The silence was older than any of us. It was stitched into the quilts and stirred into the teas and pressed into the garden soil, where the chamomile grew every year without being planted, because it had been there so long it didn't need permission anymore. And what I learned later, what took me years to see, was that the remedy my mother passed down wasn't just herbs. It was a way of living that asked women to read a man's body like weather and never once ask him to read hers. That's what the old ones knew, and some of what the old ones knew was wrong. What happened after that night wasn't one thing. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a moment. It was a season. That's the only word I have for it. A season where Rebecca did everything my mother taught her, and did it perfectly, and something in her went further and further away from me like a lantern carried down a long field at dusk. She made the teas. Every evening, there it was, the cup by my plate, the valerian and chamomile, 7 drops measured out the way my mother showed her, the honey stirred in clockwise because that's how Ma'am did it, and Ma'am's mother did it, and nobody ever asked why clockwise. Rebecca kept the house so quiet you could hear the clock tick from every room. She anticipated everything. My coffee was ready before my boots were on. My shirts were pressed before I knew they were washed. And God forgive me, I enjoyed it. For a while, I thought that's what a good marriage was. I thought the silence between us was peace. I remember telling my brother Eli he'd married the year before me, a girl named Hannah from the Byler family up in Gordonville. I told him at a barn raising in March, standing on the crossbeam with a mouth full of nails. I said, "Rebecca keeps a good house." And Eli looked at me and spit a nail into his palm and said, "Hannah throws things." And we both laughed. But the way he said it, I think about that now. He said it like a man whose wife was still alive inside the marriage. I didn't understand the difference yet. By spring, my mother had taught Rebecca her full system. That's the only word for it. She had a remedy for everything, and I don't mean just the body, though she had those too. Peppermint oil on the temples for my headaches, a comfrey salve for my hands when they cracked from the cold and the work, a tea of lemon balm and passion flower for the nights I couldn't settle. But beyond the herbs, she had rules. Don't speak when he first comes through the door. Let him breathe. Don't bring up money at the table. If he's angry, leave the room and come back with warm bread. If he raises his voice, and I'll say this plain, I raised my voice more than I should have that year. Put on your coat and walk to the garden and pull weeds until he finds you, and speak soft. Every rule was a remedy. Every remedy was a way of making the woman responsible for the man's weather. And the herbs, the actual herbs, the valerian and the skullcap and the chamomile my mother grew along the south side of the house where the stone foundation held the heat, they were part of it. Rebecca drank the calming tea every morning. My mother told her to. She said it would keep her nerves steady, keep her patient, keep her from saying things she'd regret. I didn't know about the morning tea until much later. I thought the only cup was the one she made for me at night. There was a Sunday, this would have been June, because the first hay was cut and the whole valley smelled like it, when I overheard something at the noon meal after church. We were at the Lapp farm, tables set up under the maples, and I was carrying a bench from the wagon when I passed behind where the older women sat. My mother was talking to Sadie King. She was maybe 60, 63. I always get that wrong. Dat would know. And my mother said, "Rebecca is learning. She's almost there." And Sadie said something I didn't catch. And my mother said, "The tea helps. It keeps the edges soft." I set the bench down, and my hands were shaking, and I didn't know why. I think about that now. My body knew something before my mind did, but I walked back to the men's table and sat down and ate my bread and cold meat and said nothing. Because a man in our community you don't question your mother, you don't question the old ways, not out loud, not where anyone can hear. I carried that all summer like a stone in my coat pocket, and I never took it out to look at it. That's what the old ones knew, how to carry things without looking at them. The one who finally cracked the quiet open wasn't me. It was my cousin Daniel. He was 2 years older, lived on the next road, married to a woman named Leah, who was, I'll just say it, Leah was fierce. She was small, maybe 5'2", and she had a voice she wasn't afraid of, and opinions she didn't hide, and she drove the bishop half crazy at every church meeting because she'd say things in the kitchen the other women only thought. Daniel told me something in October of that first year. We were in his wood shop. He made furniture, sold it to the English at the market in bird in hand, and we were finishing a hickory rocker, sanding the arms, and the shop smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and that particular late afternoon light was coming through the window, turning everything gold. He said, "Leah told my mother to stop coming," just like that. 7 words. I stopped sanding. He said his mother had done the same thing, the morning visits, the teachings, the teas, and Leah, 3 weeks into the marriage, had looked his mother in the eye and said, "I will learn to be his wife by being his wife, not yours." He told me his mother didn't speak to Leah for 4 months after that. 4 months of silence at Sunday meals, 4 months of a turned shoulder at quilting bees. But Daniel said, and he set down the sandpaper and looked at me, really looked. He said, "My marriage started the day Leah said that." I went home that evening. I sat in the buggy the whole ride with the reins slack and the horse finding his own way because he knew the road better than I did, and I thought about Rebecca's eyes, the way they'd changed. Not all at once. Like a creek going dry, you don't notice until you look down and the stones are showing. I want to tell you I went home that night and fixed everything. That's not what happened. What happened was slow and it hurt, and I got it wrong more times than I got it right. But the first thing, the first real thing, was a Tuesday evening in late October. The leaves were off the maples, and the sky was that flat gray that means November is coming, whether you're ready or not. I came inside, and the cup was by my plate, the tea, and instead of sitting down, I picked it up and carried it to the stove and poured it out. Rebecca was standing at the counter cutting bread, and her hands stopped. Just stopped. The knife was still in the bread. I said, "I don't need you to fix me." And I'm not a man who finds words easy. You probably know that by now. But those 6 words came from somewhere I didn't know I had, and Rebecca turned around and her chin was doing that thing, that trembling, and she said, "Your mother says a wife is the remedy." And I said, "And I meant this. I meant it with everything. You're not my remedy. You're my wife." She cried. Not the quiet kind my mother had trained into her, the real kind. The kind that sounds like something coming loose that's been held too tight for too long. I stood there and I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I put them on her shoulders, the way I'd seen my mother do to my Aunt Leah all those years ago. But different, because I wasn't trying to quiet her. I was trying to tell her she didn't have to be quiet anymore. I don't know if I got it right. I don't know if a man who'd been silent that long knows how to say the right thing the first time he opens his mouth. But I tried, and that was the beginning of something. It took a long time to untangle what my mother had woven. I say that with love, and I say it with grief, because both things are true at the same time. I talked to my mother, not that week, not that month, but that winter, in January, when the ground was frozen so hard the fence posts rang like iron if you knocked them. I sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd rolled dough the morning I brought Rebecca home, and I said, "Ma'am, the teas you gave Rebecca, the morning ones, why?" And she looked at me like I'd asked her why the sun rose. She said to keep her settled. A settled wife is a blessing to her husband. And I said, "But what about her?" And my mother, give me a second. My mother's face did something I'd never seen. Something moved behind her eyes. And she said, very quiet, "Nobody ever asked me that." 7 words. Different from Daniel's 7 words, but they broke me open just the same. My mother had been given the same tea by her mother-in-law. For 30 years she'd drunk valerian and chamomile every morning to keep herself, that was the word she used, manageable. And nobody, not Dat, not her own mother, not the bishop, not a single soul in our community, had ever once asked if she was okay. For the boy who stood in that kitchen hearing this, for the man I was becoming, I grieved something I couldn't name. I grieved it for her. I grieved it for Rebecca. I grieved it for every woman who'd been handed a cup of tea and told it was love when it was silence dressed as medicine. That's what the old ones knew, and that knowing cost more than any of us could count. There are things the Amish life gave me that I will carry until I die, and I will carry them with gratitude. The smell of hay cut in the first week of June, when the clover is mixed in, and the whole world smells like something God made on purpose. The sound of my father's hand plane on a piece of white oak, that long, clean whisper, and the curl of wood falling to the floor like a ribbon. The taste of raw honey straight from the comb in August, warm from the sun, so sweet it made your teeth ache. These are real, these are mine. And the herbs, the chamomile, the comfrey, the elderberry, the peppermint that grew wild by the springhouse, they were real medicine, good medicine, and I still grow them, and I still use them, and I still believe the land knows things that laboratories have forgotten. But I also know now that a remedy can be a cage if you hand it to someone and tell them to drink it so they'll stop being inconvenient. Wisdom dressed in plain clothes is still wisdom, but silence dressed as wisdom is something else entirely. And the two can sit so close together you can't tell them apart until somebody gets brave enough to ask, who is this remedy actually for? I'm building something now, in my marriage, in my family, where the tea is offered, not prescribed, where Rebecca grows her own garden and makes her own tinctures and decides for herself when she needs chamomile and when she needs to raise her voice. That's not how my mother did it. But I think I think if she's honest, and she is more honest now than she used to be, she's glad. If you grew up somewhere, the women were the medicine, and nobody ever asked if the medicine needed medicine. I see you. If your mother handed your wife a set of rules wrapped in herbs and called it love, I see you. If you were the husband who sat at the table and drank the tea and never once wondered who made it or why or what it cost her, I see you. And I don't say that to shame you. I say it because I was you. And if you're the woman who drank the morning cup because your mother-in-law said it would help, and you stopped tasting it after a while, and you stopped tasting a lot of things after a while, I see you. If you're still inside the community, carrying this quietly, doing what was taught, I see you. If you left, and you still can't smell chamomile without something tightening in your chest, I see you. If you're English, and you never lived this life but something in this story made you think of your own grandmother, your own kitchen, your own silence, I see you. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. Tell me in the comments, was there a remedy in your family that was more than a remedy? A tea, a rule, a tradition that shaped your marriage or your mother's marriage in ways nobody talked about? I want to hear it. I want to know I'm not the only one carrying this, and there is so much more I haven't said yet. There are remedies I haven't been ready to share, teas that were given for reasons that still make my hands shake when I think about them, but I'm getting closer. If you want to be here when I tell the rest, subscribe to Rebecca's Husband. This is where the old ways get told true. Not pretty, not angry, just true. And if a super chat or a membership is something you want to offer, that's you saying these stories matter. That's enough. That's more than enough. Your healing doesn't need anyone's permission but yours.